The galaxy left a dying alien beast to rot, but humanity wasn't going to let the World Eater escape that easily. Roy felt bile rising in his throat as he stared at the hologram of the wounded monstrosity lying dormant in the Tartarus rift. Its segmented body was punctured and blasted apart, the green ichor of its innards spilling from crevasses the size of cities. But Roy wasn't here to mourn this horrific creature. The sheer carnage displayed before the Galactic Council proved how close they'd come to eradicating the planet-devouring Leviathan, once and for all. The beast must be destroyed while we have the chance. Sci-Fi's shrill avian cry cut through the anxious murmurs of the assembled councillors. But the rift's psychic turbulence incapacitates most sentience. The fleet will go no further. Roy crossed his arms. Of course they wanted humans to do their dirty work. He raised his voice. Let me guess, you need the apes to venture where your kind dare not tread? Typical. Your species has a unique resistance to void horror. Sci-Fi clicked his beak impatiently. Assemble a team, human. Verify the World Eater's condition. Finish the job if you must, but do not fail us. Roy scowled but nodded curtly. The Council was terrified, and rightly so. If the World Eater recovered, countless more worlds would be consumed. Trillions would perish. Civilizations would crumble. This was humanity's burden now. Succeed where the galaxy's finest had not. Plunge into madness and face a weakened god. One last hunt to decide the fate of galaxies untold. Roy slammed his fist on the intercom. Hannibal Gadget Doc, report to the briefing room now. He needed his most trusted for this one, a squad that could walk through hell itself and come out the other side. Sergeant Zach Hannibal Hector stomped in first, biceps bulging under his uniform. The man was built like a tank and twice as mean. He could heft a plasma cannon like it was a pea shooter. Lieutenant Maria Gadget Esperanza entered next, her eyes never leaving the datapad in her hands. She was a pint-sized genius who could hack any system and MacGyver a bomb out of duct tape and a used food wrapper. Corporal Xian Doc Chen arrived last, stifling a yawn. Rumor had it he once restarted a man's heart while halfway down a Snarglax's gullet. Roy looked them over, satisfied. Suit up and gear up. We're hitting the Tartarus rift in 30. Hannibal raised an eyebrow. The rift? Thought that region was strictly off-limits, something about eldritch abominations and sanity-shattering anomalies. Let's just say the Council needs their best to clean up a galactic-sized mess. I'll brief you on the way. As the team filed out to grab their specialized gear, high-powered weapons, AI-assisted exosuits, the works, a slender figure in flowing robes glided into the room. I am Keltar, a diplomat from Zarantine. I will be accompanying you on your mission, the alien said, voice smooth as silk. Roy narrowed his eyes. Like hell you are. This is a human operation. I am here to observe and ensure the World Eater is destroyed by any means necessary. There was a glint of steel beneath Keltar's polite veneer. Roy bit back a growl. The Council was really twisting his arm on this one. Fine, but stay out of my team's way or you'll find yourself on a one-way trip out the airlock. A ghost of a smile flickered across Keltar's face as he inclined his head. Of course, Commander. Soon the squad was strapped in and ready to fly, the sleek experimental ship humming beneath them. Roy gripped the harness as Gadget fired up the engines, his knuckles going white. This was it. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. As they approached the rift, a yawning vortex of swirling color and pulsing energy, Roy felt an icy finger trace down his spine. It was like the abyss itself was watching them, waiting to swallow them whole. He shook off the feeling, burying it deep. Take us in, Gadget. The ship knifed into the rift, immediately shuddering as waves of psychic turbulence pummeled the hull. Warning klaxons blared as the sensors went haywire, readings fluctuating wildly. Roy clenched his jaw, fighting down the rising nausea and vertigo that threatened to overwhelm him. Keltar collapsed, spasming on the floor as he gibbered in a language that made Roy's brain itch. I'm picking up something on the scanner, Gadget called out, voice strained. Something big, massive organic signature, dead ahead. Roy forced himself to focus on the view screen. There, looming out of the ethereal miasma, was the World Eater. It hung in the void like a grotesque, oversized centipede, its segmented body torn open and oozing viscous fluids. It seemed lifeless, just drifting. But they had to be sure. "Take us in closer," Roy ordered, "but keep your distance. If that thing so much as twitches, I want us ready to bug out." As they crept nearer to the behemoth, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that they were flies buzzing around a sleeping giant, and it was about to wake up very, very cranky. Gadget's hands flew across the control panel as she initiated the deep scan of the World Eater's still form. Roy leaned forward, squinting at the readouts scrolling across the screen. Suddenly, a shrill alarm pierced the air. Roy's head snapped up just in time to see a massive spire of flesh erupt from the creature's back, hurtling towards their ship with horrifying speed. "Brace for impact," Roy roared, grabbing the harness straps and yanking them tight across his chest. The spire slammed into the ship's hull with a sickening crunch, metal crumpling like paper. The ship lurched violently, spinning out of control as the team was tossed about like ragdolls. Gadget grunted, fingers clawing at the controls as she fought to stabilize their trajectory. Hannibal's curses filled the air, mingling with the shriek of tortured metal and the blare of alarms. With a bone-jarring thud, the ship plowed into the World Eater's hide, skidding and grinding to a halt. For a moment, there was only the hiss of escaping air and the groan of settling wreckage. Then, one by one, the team began to stir. "Sound off," Roy barked, unbuckling himself from his seat. "Everyone still breathing?" A chorus of affirmative grunts and groans met his ears. Doc was already moving, scanner in hand as he checked each team member for injuries. Keltar lay slumped in his seat, a trickle of dark blood oozing from his temple. "Keep an eye on our guest," Roy ordered, jerking his chin towards the unconscious diplomat. "I'm going to assess the damage." It didn't take long to realize they were well and truly screwed. The ship was lodged in a fleshy crevice, its hull breached in a dozen places. Hannibal reported that weapons and engines were offline, though life support seemed to be holding steady, for now. Roy dragged a hand down his face, mind racing. They were stuck here in the belly of the beast, but the mission wasn't over yet. If they couldn't fly out, they'd have to hoof it. "Gadget rigged the reactor to blow on a remote signal," he said, voice grim. "If this thing isn't as dead as it looks, we'll give it a send-off it won't soon forget." The team geared up in tense silence, checking weapons and sealing their suits. Hannibal took point, cutting through the ruined hull with a plasma torch. One by one, they clambered out onto the World Eater's hide, an alien landscape of pulsing flesh and twisted spires. Roy squinted into the otherworldly gloom, unease prickling the back of his neck. It was too quiet, too still, like the calm before the storm. Gadget sidled up beside him, scanner in hand. The device pinged softly and her face paled. "It's regenerating," she whispered, horror threading her voice. "The damage from the fleet, it's healing fast." Roy followed her gaze, bile rising in his throat as he watched ragged flesh knit itself back together, new growth spurting obscenely from gaping wounds. They were out of time. "Why keep moving?" he said, shouldering his rifle. "Plant the charges at the primary nerve clusters. We'll cripple this thing's regeneration or die trying." The team set out across the World Eater's hide, trekking through the forest of flesh. But with every step the sense of wrongness grew. The air seemed to throb with a sickening pressure, a psychic weight that pressed down on Roy's mind like a physical force. Ahead of him Hannibal stumbled, one hand clutching at his helmet. "Boss," he slurred, voice thick with pain, Something's not right." Doc was at his side in an instant, scanner whirring. The medic's face was grim as he studied the readouts. "I'm seeing massive spikes in brain activity, erratic bio-readings across the board. It's the rift, the psychic turbulence. It's getting worse." Roy gritted his teeth, fighting down a surge of nausea as a fresh wave of pressure crashed over him. The mission just kept going from bad to worse. But they had to keep going. Failure wasn't an option. Not with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Roy staggered forward, each step an act of sheer will as the psychic onslaught intensified. Behind him, Hannibal let out a guttural scream, clawing at his helmet. Gadget and Doc slumped to the pulsing ground, bodies twitching. "Come on, you bastards!" Roy growled through clenched teeth. "Fight it!" But it was no use. One by one, his team collapsed, their minds overwhelmed by the alien cacophony. Roy dragged them into a fleshy alcove, propping them against the slick walls. His head pounded, thoughts scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Suddenly a voice cut through the psychic storm. "Commander Roy," it was Keltar, his tone eerily calm, "you must listen to me." Roy whirled, hand dropping to his sidearm. The Zarantine was nowhere to be seen. "Where are you?" he demanded. "What the hell is going on?" "I am speaking directly into your mind," Keltar replied, his voice an echo in Roy's skull. "The World Eater is not the mindless beast you believe it to be. It is a sapient being, one of immense psychic power." Roy shook his head, trying to clear the fog. "What are you talking about?" "The Galactic Fleet did not wound the World Eater. They merely woke it from its slumber, and now it calls out for aid." Roy's mind reeled. The Zarantine had been communicating with this thing for how long? "My people have long seen the World Eater not as a monster, but as a misunderstood entity," Keltar continued, "one with the potential to unite the fractured races of the galaxy." "Unite?" Roy spat. "By destroying everything in its path?" "No, Commander. By providing a common purpose, a shared goal. Imagine what we could achieve if we worked with the World Eater, rather than against it." Roy hesitated, the idea worming its way into his mind. An end to the ceaseless conflicts, the petty squabbles between species. Peace, on a galactic scale. He glanced at his fallen team, their faces contorted in agony. No, he couldn't trust the Zarantine, not after they'd hidden the truth for so long. Roy staggered to his feet, scooping up the explosive charges. "I'm finishing this mission," he growled, "with or without you." He stumbled out of the alcove, only to find Keltar blocking his path. The Zarantine's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, his robes billowing in a non-existent breeze. "I cannot allow you to proceed," Keltar said, his voice echoing with psychic power. Roy raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Keltar smiled, and Roy's world exploded into searing agony. He crumpled to the ground, screaming as the full force of the World Eater's psychic might slammed into his mind. It was like being flayed alive, every nerve-ending set ablaze. Through the haze of pain, Roy saw Keltar step forward, hand outstretched. "You cannot fight this, Commander," the Zarantine said almost gently. "Embrace the World Eater's will. Let it guide you." Roy gritted his teeth, blood leaking from his nose. He couldn't give in, wouldn't. The galaxy was counting on him. With a roar of defiance, he surged to his feet, swinging his rifle like a club. The butt of the weapon connected with Keltar's temple, sending the Zarantine sprawling. Roy staggered, head ringing. The psychic assault faltered, then redoubled, driving him to his knees. He crawled forward, dragging himself towards the pulsing heart of the World Eater. If he could just reach the primary nerve cluster, set the charges. Keltar loomed over him, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Foolish human," the Zarantine snarled. "You cannot hope to resist the World Eater's power." Roy fumbled for the detonator, vision blurring. His fingers closed around the device, thumb hovering over the trigger. One press, and it would all be over. But as he looked up at Keltar, at the swirling madness in the Zarantine's eyes, a flicker of doubt stayed his hand. What if Keltar was right? What if the World Eater truly was the key to lasting peace? Roy shook his head, trying to clear the treacherous thought. No, he had a mission, a duty. With a last defiant cry, Roy raised the detonator. Roy fought against the psychic onslaught, his mind a raging tempest of alien thoughts and emotions. The World Eater's malevolent presence pressed down on him, crushing his will, his very sense of self. He could feel his sanity fraying at the edges, his memories and identity unraveling like a cheap sweater. But just as he teetered on the brink of oblivion, a memory surfaced from the depths of his mind. A starry night, the vast expanse of the cosmos stretching out above him, his father's strong hand on his shoulder, pointing out the constellations, the distant worlds waiting to be explored. "Remember, Roy," his father said, his voice warm and steady, "no matter how dark the night gets, no matter how lost you feel, you've got the stars to guide you home. That's the strength of the human spirit, son. We never give up, no matter what the universe throws at us." Roy latched onto the memory like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. He focused on his father's words, on the unbreakable bond of love and trust that had always been his anchor. The indomitable will of the human race flowed through him, a blazing river of determination and defiance. With a roar that shook the fleshy ground beneath his feet, Roy surged to his feet. He stared down Keltar, his eyes burning with a fierce, unyielding light. The Zarantine diplomat recoiled, his face a mask of shock and fear. In that moment of blinding clarity, Roy saw the truth. The World Eater wasn't a misunderstood entity seeking unity, but a cosmic parasite, feeding on the psychic energy of the races it terrorized. The Zarantine had been deceived, their minds twisted by the creature's insidious influence. Roy charged forward, his body moving with a speed and strength he didn't know he possessed. He slammed into Keltar, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They grappled across the uneven terrain, a tangle of limbs and desperation. The World Eater's psychic screams reached a deafening crescendo, battering at Roy's mind with renewed fury. He could feel his thoughts beginning to splinter, his sanity crumbling under the relentless assault. But he refused to let go. He couldn't. The fate of the galaxy depended on him. With a final desperate lunge, Roy snatched the detonator from Keltar's grasp. The Zarantine's eyes widened in horror, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Roy's fist slammed down on the trigger, and the world went white. Sound filtered in first, muffled and distant, voices raised in jubilation, cheers echoing off metal walls. Roy blinked, his vision slowly clearing. He was back on the Galactic Council's ship, surrounded by his team. They looked battered and exhausted, but alive. Wonderfully, blessedly alive. Sci-Fi stepped forward, his feathered head held high. "You've done it, Commander Roy," he said, his voice ringing with pride and gratitude. "The World Eater is destroyed. The Tartarus Rift collapsed. The galaxy is safe, thanks to you and your team's bravery." The others crowded around him, clapping him on the back, their faces alight with joy and relief. But even as the celebration washed over him, Roy felt a hollow ache in his chest. He thought of Keltar, of the countless Zarantine deceived and betrayed by the creature they thought was their savior. He thought of the sacrifices made, the scars that would never heal. The price of victory had been high, perhaps too high. Slipping away from the revelry, Roy found a quiet spot by a viewport. He gazed out at the stars, those distant pinpricks of light that had always called to him. The galaxy was a darker, more dangerous place than he'd ever imagined, but it was also a place of wonder, of endless possibility. And as long as there were humans like him, like his team, there would always be hope. Hope for a better tomorrow, for a future where the races of the galaxy could stand united against the darkness. With a heavy sigh, Roy squared his shoulders and turned back to the celebration. There would be other missions, other battles to fight. But for now, he would savor this moment of triumph, surrounded by the men and women who had become his family. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.